What's up, fam? Extraordinary Life with Elijah. And we've got a wild one for you today. Jamin is my extra, and I am the very ordinary. I've got a ton of notes to go through on this one. Man, so good. As I engage my kids, I think it's so fascinating that children are born with apostolic and prophetic ministry grafted into them. That it says that if we receive little children in Jesus' name, that we receive Jesus. And apostles release real-time person in their ministry. And likewise, it says in Joel chapter 2 that if we receive our children, our sons and daughters by faith, that they will prophesy to us, which means that the prophetic are releasing real-time hearing of God's voice. So that means if we look at the little bitty tiny packages of the infants that come to us as the blessing of God's inheritance, if we look on them by faith and we magnify the tiny image, the tiny voice of God in their life, that it says that we will receive the person of Jesus through apostolic and prophetic ministry. That just blows my mind. I love spending time with my little ones. And in that context, that in the kingdom, it comes in seed form. It comes so small, that the kingdom comes in small packages, and that it's our role within our relationship with God to magnify what God has given to us, not to exaggerate. Darkness exaggerates, but in the kingdom, we magnify. So darkness likes to build mountains out of molehills, but within the kingdom, we look at very, very small things and find very, very large expressions of God's glory within them. Now, in Ezekiel 47, woohoo, here we go. Ezekiel 47, there is written that a man comes to Ezekiel and begins to investigate the temple and water that's flowing from the altar and measuring it and its journey towards the Dead Sea, and it imparts life. And as the story unfolds, it tells about how water is coming down off of the altar and flowing across the threshold of the temple's door in a dead beeline towards the Dead Sea. As I started discovering this years ago, God led me to this question of asking, how deep is the Dead Sea? Why is the water running from Jerusalem straight towards the Dead Sea? What's so special about it? Now, as I did my research, I love Google. I could spend hours on that thing. As I did my research, I found out that there are 3 deepest depressions on the face of the earth, and that at number 3, we have Turpinpindi, which is 505 feet below sea level. Number 2 is Lake Assal, and it's just a little bit deeper at 509 feet below sea level. But there's one depression in all the face of the earth that is the deepest, lowest depression in all of the earth. And as you might have guessed, it is the Dead Sea. Congratulations, you're good at this game. The Dead Sea, number 1, the Dead Sea is at 1,360 feet below sea level. But the Dead Sea itself is the deepest below sea level lake in all of the world and is 1,004 feet deep. So the surface of the water is 1,360 feet below sea level, and below that is 1,004 feet at the bottom, making it the very bottom of the Dead Sea is 2,364 feet below sea level. Beyond all of those facts, I did more research that the Dead Sea is a hypersalinated body of water, and it's one of the most salinated lakes in all of the world. It's the deepest and the lowest hypersalinated lake in the world. No Surprise there. But I also found out that you can get hypersalinated water super, super cold. You can cool hypersalinated water with its salt down to 58 degrees below zero and it won't freeze. If you fall into water that is right at that freeze point of like 32 to 33 degrees Fahrenheit, you've got a matter of minutes before you expire if you don't have a wetsuit on. And so at 58 degrees below zero, death inducing to the max at the cold level. And when it's hot and dry, arid level, if the water is hot, nothing can live in hypersalinated water because of its salt content. Fish can't live it. There's only just a few bacteria and some odds and ends creatures that live in it. But all in all, the hypersalinate produces death. Not only so, but in order for it to be a hypersalinated lake and not either fill all the way up because there's extra water, but also not to go all the way dry, that has to be super dry and arid. And all of the water that's flowing into the Dead Sea, it doesn't have anywhere to go. It flows into it, and then the water that evaporates out of it is at the perfect level so that it's perfectly oriented to be called the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is boasting in the earth that it's the deepest, darkest, most depressed, death-ridden place in the earth. And that's so awesome to me then that the river of living water is running directly to the Dead Sea like a heat-seeking missile, that Jesus came to seek and to save the lost. And this water is headed to the Dead Sea like a heat-seeking missile of life. Now, there is no riverbed that goes directly from Jerusalem to the Dead Sea. So this is very intentional water. And not only is the water itself very intentional, but the man who's with Ezekiel is also being very intentional. He takes Ezekiel out and goes out 1,000 cubits from the temple and asks Ezekiel to investigate the water. At every 1,000 cubits, the man again asks Ezekiel to engage the living water. Now, the New Living Translation says that a 1,000 cubits is 1,750 feet, which is what we're going to use. I did other research and found that a cubit is 18 inches. If you multiply that by 1,000, it comes to 18,000. You divide that by inches, it comes to 1,500 feet. But we're going to use the larger distance of 1,750 because, again, in the kingdom, we don't have to exaggerate things. We just magnify them. That says that the man with Ezekiel measures off 1,000 cubits and asks him to walk through the water, and it was up to his ankles. Man measures off another 1,000 cubits, has him walk through it, and it's knee deep. Another 1,000, it's up to Ezekiel's waist. And at 4,000 cubits from the temple, the water is so deep that Ezekiel can't even wade through it. It says he could swim it and become a river so wide that no man could cross it. Now, the immediate application is that blessing, anointing, favor, and grace, the supernatural power of God to accomplish the impossible and impart life gets deeper and deeper, more powerful and more of a flow, just flooding into the earth the further away that you get from its source. So good. Now, this 4,000 cubit place, the man asks Ezekiel, "Son of man, do you see?" Now, in Jewish idiom, this is a challenge to say, have you been paying attention and do you understand the pattern? I've laid it out for you 4 times. Do you get the pattern, son of man? Now, if you look at the Vitruvian Man, we've all seen this graphic, but if you look at this prime example of a man that was drawn out, if you divide the top of his head in half, you're going to be at his waist. And if you divide that in half again, you're going to be at his knees. You divide that in half again, you're going to be at ankle depth. Now, the pattern is that every 1,000 cubits, the water is doubling in its depth. And we know that at the first 1,000 cubits that it was up to Ezekiel's ankles. If we take a man who's 6 feet tall and we divide that in half, in half, and in half, his ankle depth is going to be at 9 inches. Now, I've tested this out with people and had them step into water and say, now, would you say that that is ankle deep? And they're like, yes, I would. And as I looked at all of those depths and measured it on myself, 9 inches does work out quite well. So if we say that the depth was 9 inches at the end of 1,000 cubits away from the temple, and then we go out to 9, 18, and go on from there to being 6 feet deep, doubled at the end of 4,000 cubits, I came up with a question. Being that the Dead Sea is about 21 miles away from Jerusalem, how deep would the water be by the time it hit the Dead Sea if it was doubling every 1,000 cubits and was 9 inches deep at its first iteration? Why, Elijah, what a great question. What's the answer? I don't know. Maybe I'll have to calculate it. I already did. You're welcome. Now, reasoning by faith, I figured that the water would be at least as deep as the elevation as Jerusalem, and I wasn't wrong. So Jerusalem is at 2,582 feet above sea level. And the bottom of the Dead Sea is at 2,364 feet below sea level. So that means that the total elevation change between the two is 4,946 feet. Now, I didn't know how to calculate this number. It's changing over time. But my friend Diana has a PhD in math. It was super easy for her to calculate. Drum roll, please. And at the Dead Sea, having doubled every 1,000 cubits, 63.36 iterations from Jerusalem to the Dead Sea, our depth upon hitting the Dead Sea was 4.44 times 10 to the 18th feet deep. If you have no idea how deep that is, it's 143 light years. Now, again, that might not help you. Here you go. 1 light year is the distance that an object would travel at the constant speed of light for 1 year's time. So how far is 143 light years? Our sun is at 9.8 times 10 to the negative 6th light years away. Pollux, which is a supergiant, is at 33.7 light years away, and we're still not even halfway to 143 light years. So at 143 light years away from the earth, which is the depth of the water as it reaches the Dead Sea, you can't even see the earth from that distance away, much less this giant that's boasting in the earth of being the deepest, darkest, most death-ridden place in all the earth. I can't even see the earth or the Milky Way from where I'm sitting with Jesus on my inflatable popsicle blow-up pool toy drinking lemonade with him. Excuse me, what was that? I can't hear the boasting of your lies anymore. Oh, man. Oh, now I know that there are haters out there, those who are in disbelief, and they're like, oh man, Elijah padded his numbers, which I didn't, because if I went with 1,000 cubits based off 18 inches and went with the 1,500 foot 1,000 cubit length, I would have had 73.29 iterations over 21 miles, and I would have had 165.4 light years of water, but I didn't. We don't have to exaggerate, we just magnify. But I thought I'd help you out anyway. I don't have to exaggerate, just magnify. So I snuck into Jamin's crib and I measured his little bitty tiny infant ankle. my prophetic apostolic minister. I measured his ankle, which is 1 inch, by the way. And then I decided that I would remove 25% of that length and call it 0.75 inches. I ran the same calculations. Instead of a man wading through the water at 1,000 cubits, it's my little prophetic apostolic minister, Jamin Uriah, who wades through the water at 1,000 cubits with his 1 inch ankle, and we remove 25% and we pat it in the opposite direction. And do you know what I came up with? How much water we would have by the time we hit the Dead Sea? It would be, drum roll please, 11.9 light years of water. That's 1.2 million times further away than the sun. So, I hope you're still tracking with me. My goodness. So, lots of information, I know. So what's the encouragement? Everywhere that the water flowed, the living water brought life, except for 2 places. The marshes and the swamps were able to resist the supernatural impartation of life. Now think about marshes and swamps. Marshes and swamps are saturated with water, and they don't take in any more water because they aren't releasing any water. Now, it's easy, super easy to allow insecurity to convince you that your life is just a trickle, that your life is just a drop in the bucket of the world's problems, and that you're not going to make any difference. Fix your eyes on Jesus, who poured out his life on the cross, which is the New Testament version of the Old Testament era's altar. Jesus poured out his life and altered, prophetic puns, the destiny of all of mankind. He was just one man in human history, but his life poured out released the oceans of heaven's grace, and we're all downstream from this life-giving flow from heaven's throne. Revelation says that life-giving water flows out from God's throne and is pictured exactly the same as the water flowing from the altar within the temple here in Ezekiel. Our authority with Christ, seated as co-rulers in heavenly places, is released on earth through laying our lives down as living sacrifices on the altar of humble obedience. The rule of heaven's throne is released on earth through an altar, through sacrificial service of others. Think of Jesus. He didn't come to be served. Even Jesus, who had every right to be, but he came to serve and to pour out his life as a ransom for many. Now, I agree with you that your life is but a trickle, a drop in the ocean of a sea of death and depravity. But the example of Jesus's life and the living water that flows through him reveals that wherever the water flows, it empowers the impartation of supernatural life. Now, you don't have to exaggerate the capability of your life. It will multiply, grow, and increase to fill the earth clear to the highest heavens as you magnify God's glory in and through you by faith. Even if it is just a trickle, you have to pour out what you have. Pray for the person in line with you at Walmart. Give a kind word to the person who's sitting on a corner asking for donations. Give to someone's life. Be generous in what you have. Where Jesus, the light of the world, has come, we're to arise and glow like the stars in the heavens. And where Spirit, the living water, has come, we're to rise as we pour ourselves out and flow to the heavens. Where water meets the heavens, it's appropriate for its depth to be measured in light years. if you subscribe to what I am doing, hit the button, hit it, and then get it. Hit the bell as well so you get notified with the new content. And if you love this video, you didn't just like it, hit the thumbs down button. I pray blessings on your day. I love you guys lots, and I will see you in the next video.